Over to you, Scott.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Or if you're in my neck of the woods in Oregon, it is still morning. So good morning. I'm really excited to talk in this brief session here on this idea of client team dynamics. And this is something that I, like really spend a lot of my energy on in the company. And I hope you enjoy the content here. And I welcome your questions. And I think we're going to try our first ever poll. Megan and I were discussing. Neither of us have ever done a poll live. So jury's out on whether that works, but we do have a backup plan just in case. Just a quick thing for those of you who might not know me that well. So I'm one of the co-founders here at Carnegie. I was the co-founder of Dartlet with Tyler, and I serve as the company's chief leadership strategist. And so what I spend my time on for the most part is working with CSLs and AMs and teams and a lot of clients on change management, on team dynamics, on sales, different things like that. And I represent the company largely with VPs and presidents and boards and things like that. And so I've learned a lot over the years, and I was a former VP of enrollment and chief marketing officer at a couple of universities before starting Dartlet. So I have the sort of internal dynamics of understanding how universities work, how the different administrative positions function together, and I'm hoping to share that with you today. My team chem profile is the industrious and pioneering trailblazer. I live in Bend, and one little key fact about me is that I actually have my first degree in piano performance. So I would consider myself a piano performer to some degree today, but I'm mostly a composer and arranger, and you can find me on Spotify and iTunes, but please don't mock me. It's bad enough that I'm out there. Just a note, I always recommend people do listen to my albums on mute fully. Because all of my proceeds for ads go to a homeless shelter here in the Central Oregon Valley. So I say, like, hey, if you're not able to listen and don't want to listen, just listen on mute, and just know that the ad revenue has a real benefit and payoff. Awesome. So the goal for the session today is just this basic statement. Clients are weird, so let's try to understand them. Why do they do the things they do? Because they do interesting and weird things all the time. And, I'm in these conversations 6 to 10 times a day. And it's always fascinating to see like the number of times that things repeat themselves and the number of times things don't. And one of the things that has been so interesting over the 15, 20 years of consulting that I've done is how many things don't repeat, and but yet they have an origin source that is something we can use and identify. And so part of the session goal today is really to help you see that and understand the dynamics. So for the session, we'll look at the cabinet, because I think that's the source of a lot of the sort of dysfunction and interesting dynamics within the institution. We'll look at the currency of institutions. We'll look at how do we read the signs of a client interaction. We'll get into some fun scenario forums, so hopefully use the chat there a little bit. So get your chat fingers ready for that part, and then we'll have time hopefully for a couple of questions if you have them. So first, the cabinet. When we talk about cabinets, and if you're not familiar, what we're really talking about is the sort of university executive roundtable, if you will. And at the center of that is the president, the CFO, and the board of trustees. And so board is notable in that they are essentially the hiring manager of the president for the institution. And then around that group are these functional areas of expertise. People that we work with, like our vice president for enrollment or a vice president for marketing, are usually sitting in the cabinet here. And then we have something like a lot of times schools have their athletic director or their director or VP of advancement and fundraising. They have a VP of student affairs or student success. They have their chief academic officer, which is usually referred to as the provost. And then they oftentimes will have like a CTO, CIO type person sitting around the table. And their cabinets change. There are different combinations of people that are organized in different cabinet relationships. But this is a general setup for how a cabinet is functioning at a university. And it's really helpful to sort of think about the idea that for the most part, Carnegie, we work with these two people, the enrollment VP or the marketing VP, and that there's all these other things happening at an institution, and there are pressure points that exist within these other areas that impact the people that we work with. And notably, I've also noted here that we're starting our like engagement more with these folks with the light green line. Like in that we're starting to work more these days in places like advancement through Slate Solutions or through our Acuity Darts product or in student success portals. But these are the beginnings of what is a very dominant relationship we have in these two areas. So if we think about the cabinet from a very high level, there are some specific pressure points that I would highlight. The first of those is that the cabinet generally has, in most institutions, a prioritization on revenue generating functions. So that typically is enrollment and fundraising. Sometimes athletics, but very often not so much. You might not realize this, but a study a couple of years ago said that only 17 universities in the United States actually make money on athletics. So that's surprising, actually, when you think about the number of butts and seats at big football games and things like that. You'd think that there'd be a lot of revenue generated, but it's actually not so much. And so the reality is the main function of generating the cash that pays for all of this stuff is enrollment and fundraising. Another one pressure point is, and this is specifically coming out of the pandemic, is how retention is used as a revenue source. A lot of universities felt an extreme amount of pressure from a lack of customer service in the pandemic. And a lot of students moved around and started to transfer like athletes in the transfer portal in the pandemic. And so a lot of institutions are now refocusing their energy around retention as a revenue source and trying to think about how do they create a model that is truly designed for outcomes and getting students from enrollment to degree and matriculation to a degree. And outcomes is a big change. And also a lot of institutions are now wrestling with like a market share dynamic. So what was a pretty easy job in the past has now become very difficult. A lot of my sort of mentors and friends are presidents of universities, and they've said like, hey, this is the toughest job in America because of all of the sort of change resistance and the long-term history of the industry just acting in a certain way and now needing to completely change with that. The main way that things are changing is modality and program. So a lot of schools learned, whether they like it or not, that they could do online education, for example, through the global pandemic. And so now there's a lot of questions about what do we do with our modality and our time sync and what buyers want and things like that in relation to that. And program mix is a big part of that. And then the last part for pressure that is unique to higher ed versus other industries is dealing with faculty. For my sort of business friends out there, I would say that faculty are like having 3/4 of your staff with, like on a subcontract agreement that's a lifetime agreement. So they don't have to do what you say, and they don't have any reprisal other than if they commit a crime or something like that. They're not going to be let go from an institution. And that has created a dynamic which enables them to kind of wait out anybody around the table that you see here if they want to. And I'm not going to go through each of these slides in detail, but I do want to point out here as I go through and just highlight a few things that what I've done here, just to give you a framework of how to think about these relationships in the cabinet, is that I've gone through each of the cabinet roles and I've tried to list what the challenges are for that specific role. So if we think about enrollment and marketing, we think about a world where they're dealing with increased competition, and they're dealing with demand compression, and they're dealing with segmentation and hyper-personalization, and they're dealing with a loss of lead volume. And these are things that for a lot of us on the call, we're hearing that from clients on the regular because we're deeply embedded within these roles within the cabinet. What's maybe helpful for the purposes of this session is to think about the other cabinet members and what their pressures are, because at the end of the day, when you're here, those pressures are all playing out at the same time, right? When you're in marketing and enrollment, you're really thinking about this. But when you're in the cabinet relationship, you're now having to jockey and position your pressures against everybody else's pressures. And so that's maybe notable to think about. And one of the key ways that we can manage a client dynamic in a very positive way is to listen carefully to what the pressure priority really is. Because it's not often, or maybe I should say more, it is often the function that the particular function, like marketing, for example, may not have the pressures that are at the highest priority of the institution. It might be someone else, like athletics or student success or academic pressures that are maybe more pressing for the cabinet. And that creates dynamics that affect our ability to successfully work with the client. And so when you just look at a very high level, you think about, say, fundraising, for example. One of the biggest pressures that fundraising is having right now is that they have the number of donors is decreasing dramatically, but the dollar per donor is going up dramatically. So they have this inverse relationship. They're chasing donors that are spending lots of money or giving lots of money to the institution, but there's just a lot fewer of them going around. So just imagine a world where you're kind of dealing with that kind of pressure. I see the statistics saying like $58 trillion with a T of assets are migrating from the boomer generation to the millennial and Xer generation in the next 10 years. And that's because boomers are, they're dying out in some ways. They're also like transitioning a lot of wealth down. And that is changing the dynamic for how that person sitting around the table has to deal with generating enough revenue from their alumni and donor populations to sustainably succeed. Your student success person, they're dealing with the mental health and persistence challenges of a generation that's really struggling right now. And many of us have become aware of that. You don't have to go too far, just drive down any highway and you'll see it. There's a lot of anxiety and pressure out there right now. They're dealing with a new renewed focus on retention as a revenue source and the consequences if they're unsuccessful. Your board and president, they're dealing with fiscal challenges. They're dealing with culture and strategy, crisis management in many cases. They're even thinking about things like mergers and acquisitions, something that you hadn't seen a lot of in higher ed that now is becoming a mainstream conversations. And they're also some of the key leaders in fundraising. So they're going to make a lot of the big asks. Your provost is dealing with the faculty dynamic that we talked about earlier. They're also dealing with the quality of the education, the articulation and degree conferrals, the faculty tenure, and all of the elements of that. Your athletic director is dealing with program success and recruiting, especially in a D3 environment, but recruiting quotas and things like that are pretty common in that space. They're also dealing with a really rapidly changing market for athletics in the NIL space, where now we see college athletes making pro athlete level money at some schools, and other schools other schools that's just not possible, and yet the dynamic exists. So there's a lot of pressure on athletic directors for that. And then your technology and systems people are dealing with all sorts of stuff related to how to make all of this work. Faculty come and say, hey, we're going to do lots of new online programs. And they're like, how do I do that? I don't even have a system to make that happen today. So just as a first bit of discussion here, I'd ask to ask you to think about this, and maybe you can drop into the chat some thoughts. But how do cabinet members simultaneously make progress against their individual challenges? So assuming that, let's say that everybody has challenges, how is it that cabinet members make progress against their challenges? What do they have to do to make that happen?
Scott, I think you have a question in the chat. Maybe before we talk about how do they actually make progress against their challenges, Lindsay's asking, how can we tell when they're actually facing these challenges? Are we supposed to ask, or what advice do you have for that?
Yeah, it's really great. A really great question. One you kind of heard from the morning session, like talk to customers. Like I really resonate with that. Like actually asking that question on the regular is a really good idea. It doesn't matter where you are in the organization. Don't rely on, say, just your, client success leader to ask this question. If you're on a reporting call, you can always take a minute or two to say, hey, like, how's it going? Are there any new things that are happening? What's the mood or vibe on campus? How are results going? Just any way to be able to start to unlock a client to let them be vulnerable with you and talk about the things that they're facing. And it's surprisingly common in asking just the basic, like, how are you doing question, how clients are willing to tell someone like us or a group of us what they're going through, because you have to remember, let's say in a campus environment, it is very, in many cases, very small environment. People know each other. You can't exactly vent with your peers without facing potential issues, right? And so having a trusted source like us be on a call and asking them like, hey, what's going on? Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. What are you planning to do? Do you need help? Like those are all things that we should be doing on the regular across the board. And if you want to learn one big lesson for client dynamics, I'd say go back to session 1 today and go talk to the customer, ask them. And you'll be surprised what you learn.
The second part of Lindsay's question, I think that's super helpful, is sometimes clients will hold their cards close to their chest, and maybe that's because they feel that they should, or maybe they're not fully comfortable because, leaning into Carnegie services. How do you approach that?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good client dynamic understanding for us. If a client's holding their cards close to their chest with us, that means we aren't part of their inner circle, right? And so, there are a couple of dynamics that I'm going to get to in the presentation that deal with this, but and I don't want to spoil my quiz, so I'm trying to be careful with what I answer, how I answer. But let me just say, I will get to this, but I do think that it's notable when a client is unwilling to share for us, that like that's a warning sign for us that like our relationship isn't at a point where we could expand or potentially count on it staying. Staying consistent, because if a client's unwilling to sort of be vulnerable with us, there's not a really strong chance of success for us in a long-term relationship.
No, thank you.
So I see here, collaboration and empathy is a key to each of their individual challenges. Yes, so great. Bryson gets the star on this one for this respect. When you have a group of people with individual challenges, the only way everybody wins is if they have infinite resources. Anybody know anybody that has that? Can you introduce them to me? I would love that. But it just doesn't really practically work, right? Nobody has infinite resources. Even the biggest and best institutions in the country don't actually have infinite resources. And so as a result, they have to collaborate and create a dynamic which says to their peers, like, my challenge is worth more of our resources than your challenge. And that person has to agree that they're going to defer work on their challenge in order to succeed with or emphasize or invest in another challenge. And that's where the interesting dynamics start to occur with clients, and where you really have to pay attention when you listen. So let's look at the second consideration here. What dynamics exist to enable success for one or more cabinet leaders? Anybody want to venture into that space?
I think you set yourself up for your
Vigiano says finding goals. Oh, is this still to number 1? Dave, were you thinking that?
Yeah, I was speaking to number 1, sort of in 2 ways, but I think the
Well,
second
you know,
part
one
might
thing
get
about this is it's somewhat interesting that you noted interrelated goals or finding goals that are interrelated, because that's actually one way that it answers number two, is that sometimes the dynamic what dynamic exists to sort of enable success for one or more is to create a set of shared goals. And that enables one or two or three or four cabinet members to actually work together on a challenge. And then let's look at consideration number three: who's in charge. So who's in charge on the board? The cabinet. Who's in charge? Okay, Dave says whoever has the resources. The football coach. Okay, I like these thoughts. Okay. Yeah. So the short answer is it depends, right? But essentially, one of the key things is the board. Yeah. So Ashley, kudos to you, and also to Hannah. The board president is often the critical person, because the president works at the pleasure of the board. So, you know, a lot of people think the president is in charge, but in a shared governance environment, that's rarely the case. And the reality is the board actually has hiring and firing control over the president. So even the president has a boss in this space. So it's important to understand the board dynamics. And one of the things that we often do to ensure success is we try to get our data to the board so that we can share with the board the ability or our partnership and our abilities, so that they feel confident in spending the money they spend with us. Last thing is sometimes presidents operate really differently. So some presidents are, you know, really command and control, and they control everything. And other presidents distribute their influence down to cabinet members, and so they create like a coalition or a club within the cabinet. Okay, so here's our quiz time. All right, Megan. So we're gonna attempt the quiz. So we're gonna talk about the currency, and the question is: so what is the currency of the university? And I've given you three choices here. So do you want to try? Oh, look, it worked.
Yay. We did it. And I do feel obligated to tell you we have 5 minutes left, given I know how many slides you have left you want to get through.
Okay, I will go quick.
You're jumping. Right. Can everyone see how many participants we have? Is this live, or can only I see that?
I do not know the answer.
Ooh, we're at 64%. We're climbing. We're at 56 of 77. Give everyone a few more seconds. We have a strong leader here. I feel like I'm watching a horse race. All right, almost there. 67. Oh my gosh, are we going to get everyone? I guess I should only expect 74.
We only have 5 minutes left. You better close it.
All right. The winner is financial resources, 46, 63%.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a good. So, all right. This was a trick question. First, I will say trick question. The financial resources is a good signal or sign, but the actual answer is not on the board. So I tricked you all in this. There's only one currency at any institution, and that currency is power. Power and finances, power and size of organization, and power and presence almost always correlate. But the actual power and influence of the individual is the only currency. So it's understand that cabinet members trade in power. They trade influence for resources. They trade the size of their organization for finances. They trade brand presence and podium time for favors and things like that. So power is the dominant. So let's talk about that really, really quick. So here's a few things about power that are really important to watch for. And this is something that you should all pay attention to in relation to client dynamics. A new leader of anything is given a lot of power. Okay, so if you hear that we have a new hire in a new VP of marketing, or even a director of marketing or a director of enrollment in an organization, they're often given like this halo time where they have a lot of extra power to throw around. And that's important to note, that when a new leader comes in, they're often given the ability to sort of figure out their space. And that is a time that we have to, as a company, be very careful with how we manage that relationship. Enrollment performance. If enrollment is doing well or not doing well, that can lead to a lot of power dynamics. If it's not doing well, there's a lot of pressure on a lot of different people around that cabinet table to do things differently. If it is doing well, the person who's in charge of that has a lot of power and influence to make things happen. Big donations, campus news, watching these things are key codes to understanding who among that table might have some of the biggest power dynamics. One of the key ones that I think you all will see is who's in the room and who's not. When you do a reporting call, for example, does the VP come to those calls, or do they distribute that down to a certain group? At what frequency do they come? Do they have a marketing performance call that the enrollment VP comes to? There's a lot of things that you can see without ever having to ask the question. If a marketing VP comes to an enrollment performance call, it may be because that enrollment leader needs the marketing person to help them at the cabinet table. And so they need more power than they currently possess to get something going. How demanding or easy as a client is often a function of how much power they have. If they're really demanding and wanting a lot of returns and things like that, or a lot of information, it might be because they're trying to seek or get power and they don't have it. Or if things are pretty easy, it might be because they don't have a lot of sort of accountability to sort of report to their peers because they have a lot of the power. What a client says about their peers or departments. So a lot of times you hear the cues about this, like, oh, I really hate working with my VP of enrollment because they're such a jerk and they take all the money and the resources and the people and stuff like that. Well, there's a pretty good idea that the enrollment leader has a lot of power and we're working with the wrong potential person. And then who has to be involved in contracting your proposals? Like if somebody's renewing and it takes 3 or 4 different layers, that tells you a good, sort of good insight into how many people have to sign off. And it's not really procurement here. That might be one layer that's just required regulatory wise, but it's like a VP of marketing has to get the VP of enrollment and the president and the provost to sign off on an agreement. Well, that tells you that person might not have that much power. Or if they just sign it, it means they have a lot, if that makes sense. Okay, so last thing, and I know we're running right at time here, so I'm going to do 1 or 2 of these really quick. And if you can stay on, great. If not, I know you all have busy days. But a couple these scenarios happen quite frequently. So what do they mean for a client partnership? So example number 1, a VP of marketing that involves a VP of enrollment in that decision making. So I'll answer that one and we'll go on to the next one. But that's a good example of where that VP of marketing probably doesn't have as much power as they need to get things done. And so they've collaborated with the VP of enrollment to try to get enough coalition power to get what they need done. So another one would be number 2, a director of marketing or enrollment that shields the VP from conversations that involve extensions. So like extending work or doing other things. What's the story with that one? Does anyone have an idea there? So Lyndon says that they don't have enough resources. Yeah, it could be. It could also be. So that's a good first guess. Another thing it could be is that the VP of marketing or enrollment is not interested in a deeper relationship with Carnegie, or they want to control those conversations at their level, and they're asking the director to blockade. And that's a good sign that we might need to work around that person to try to see if we can unlock things a little different. What about a marketing leader that's asking for a ton of data or a supporting ROI? Needs proof to get the signature? Yeah. Okay. There's a good one where that person has to go to other people to convince them. So they're trying to seek power. All right. And then a new VP of enrollment reacts negatively to almost every strategy or in place prior to their arrival. Okay, that's like a pretty typical thing. When a new person comes in, they want to create space for themselves and make other people feel like they know what to do. So they're trying to get power or seek power. All right, so just things to think about, the dynamics of clients and how they are operating. So just one last slide, just 6 tips here for how you manage a successful long-term client partnership. First, follow the power. Obviously, that's the key for the whole thing. If you can see that our client doesn't have it, try to figure out who does, and then work with the CSLs or the team to try to get to that person to have a more direct relationship. Beware of transitions. When transitions occur, it's a big warning sign that we need to buck up and manage things really differently. Always look for the signs, be on the lookout. So ask and talk to people and listen for the challenges. Also, always try to expand our relationships beyond just one person. I know that can be hard, but always ask, like, hey, who else is interested in this stuff? Who should we talk to them? Should we have a conversation and show them what's going on? And then one last thing is help our contacts and help our clients build their case for success. Just remember that our clients are people too, and they have their own aspirations and their own dreams. And a lot of times they need somebody like us to help them build a case. And so it's often that moment where we're like, oh, is this in scope or is this out of scope? Helping them build a case usually pays great dividends in the long term. So work closely as a team to try to help them out whenever you can. All right, we don't have time for questions because I'm over time, but I'm happy to take your questions via Slack. So thanks for listening, and I hope this has been a great session for you.
Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you for everyone for attending. Your next session starts in 10 minutes. See you there.